Some voices from the past saw the future with stunning clarity. You are about to discover 30 historical predictions that came true against all odds. This journey will reveal how geniuses, authors, and even ancient oracles accurately foresaw everything from submarines to the internet. How did Leonardo da Vinci sketch flying machines centuries before the Wright brothers took flight? What chilling novel described the Titanic disaster 14 years before it happened? By the end, you will see history not as a random sequence of events, but as a story where the ending was sometimes guessed in advance. What does it say about us that the future can be written in the past? Centuries before the first airplane left the ground, a mind in Renaissance Italy was already sketching its blueprint. Leonardo da Vinci filled his notebooks with designs for machines that could conquer the sky, from an ornithopter with flapping wings inspired by birds to an aerial screw that eerily predicted the helicopter. His genius was not magic, it was born from relentless observation. He studied the way air moved over a bird's wing, how its feathers adjusted for lift and descent. He was reverse engineering nature itself, laying down the principles of aerodynamics on paper long before the science had a name. These were not just fanciful drawings. They were detailed mechanical plans, complete with notes on materials and mechanisms. The tragedy, of course, is that the technology of his time could not bring his visions to life. His flying machines remained prisoners of the page, but the principles he uncovered, the very foundation of flight, were a prediction that simply had to wait for the world to catch up. While Leonardo's flying machines were trapped on paper, another visionary was writing a vessel into existence. Decades before a functional submarine would patrol the oceans, Jules Verne sent his magnificent Nautilus on epic voyages in his 1870 novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This was not a crude, claustrophobic tube. Verne's submarine was a technological marvel, a luxurious underwater palace powered entirely by electricity. He described it as a masterpiece containing everything from a library and an art collection to a grand dining room, all illuminated by brilliant electric lights. Its power came from sodium-mercury batteries, a fictional source that perfectly captured the era's burgeoning fascination with electrical energy. The Nautilus could dive to incredible depths, sustain its crew for months without resurfacing, and journey to every corner of the globe, all while its passengers observed the wonders of the deep through massive observation windows. This breathtaking vision became a reality less than a century later. In 1954, the United States Navy launched the world's first operational nuclear-powered submarine. What was its name? The USS Nautilus. Just like Verne's creation, it could travel vast distances underwater without needing to surface, fundamentally changing naval warfare and exploration. Verne's genius was not pure fantasy. He was an avid reader of scientific journals, and he wove the cutting-edge research of his time into his narrative. He saw the potential of electricity and understood the principles of underwater pressure and propulsion. His prediction was so accurate because his imagination was firmly anchored in the possible, a stunning forecast of a technology that was still waiting in the depths of the future. Long before the world was connected by invisible signals, one man saw the entire network in his mind. Nikola Tesla, a visionary inventor of the early 20th century, dreamed of a world linked by a global wireless system. He imagined a future where information, news, and even live images could be transmitted instantly to any point on the globe, a concept that seemed like pure magic at the time. His grand plan centered on the Wardenclyffe Tower, a monumental structure on Long Island designed to be the heart of this new system. He believed that by using the Earth itself as a conductor, he could transmit electrical energy and information freely through the ground and the air, eliminating the need for a tangled web of wires. This was not just a simple radio tower. It was meant to be a global communication hub, a prototype for a network that would allow anyone with a simple, handheld device to access a world of knowledge and connection. Does that sound familiar? He was essentially describing the internet and the smartphone over a century before they became everyday realities. But Tesla's grand vision was plagued by problems. The technology required was staggeringly advanced and expensive for its day. His primary financial backer, the industrialist J.P. Morgan, eventually withdrew his support, unable to see the commercial potential in what he reportedly called a wireless tower for sending messages to nobody in particular. The Wardenclyffe Tower was never fully operational and was later demolished for scrap. Tesla died with his great dream unrealized, his name fading into relative obscurity for a time. Yet, the principles he championed, the use of electromagnetic waves for wireless communication, the very foundation of his world system, are the same principles that underpin our modern world of Wi-Fi, mobile data, and the global internet. His prediction did not fail. The world simply needed more time to build the future he so clearly saw. 14 years before the Titanic met its fate, a book appeared that seemed to tell its story. In 1898, author Morgan Robertson penned a novella titled Futility, a work that would later be seen not as fiction but as a haunting prophecy. The story centered on the Titan, a British passenger liner hailed as the largest and most luxurious ship afloat and famously deemed unsinkable. On a cold April night, while traveling at high speed, the Titan strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks into the icy depths. The similarities to the real-life disaster are staggering. Both ships were colossal for their time. Both were celebrated for their watertight compartments and supposed invincibility, and both carried a tragically insufficient number of lifeboats for all the souls on board. Even the names Titan and Titanic echo one another with an eerie resonance. How could such a specific prediction exist over a decade before the event? Some argue it was a case of remarkable intuition, a writer subconsciously piecing together the trends of his era. The late 19th century was a time of intense maritime competition, with shipbuilders constantly striving for bigger, faster, and more luxurious ocean liners. Robertson, a former sailor, understood the dangers of the North Atlantic route and the arrogance that could lead to cutting corners on safety. His prediction might have been an educated guess, a logical conclusion drawn from the trajectory of naval engineering and human nature. Others see it as a truly inexplicable coincidence, a moment where fiction and reality collided with tragic precision. Whatever the explanation, the existence of futility forces us to wonder if some events cast their shadows long before they happen, leaving clues for those who know how to look. Years before the first mushroom cloud rose over the desert, a novelist described the horror with terrifying precision. H.G. Wells published his novel The World Set Free in 1914, and in its pages he envisioned a global conflict fought with what he called atomic bombs. These were not mere explosives. Wells described them as weapons of unimaginable power, dropped from airplanes and capable of leveling entire cities. Most chillingly, he wrote that these bombs would continue to emit a dangerous and persistent radioactivity, rendering the blasted areas uninhabitable for years. To make this prediction, Wells had to invent a scientific principle. He conceived of a nuclear chain reaction, a term he himself coined for the book. He imagined a process where the splitting of one atom would trigger the splitting of others in an uncontrollable, energy-releasing cascade. This was pure speculation, a work of fiction built on the nascent atomic theories of his day. Yet it was a speculation that would plant a seed in the mind of a young physicist named Leo Szilard. Szilard read Wells' novel and was profoundly struck by the concept of a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. Decades later, in 1933, the idea suddenly crystallized for him as he waited at a traffic light in London. He realized that if you could find the right element, you could indeed create a chain reaction just as Wells had described. This revelation directly led to his filing of the key patent for the nuclear reactor and his pivotal role in urging the United States to develop the atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could. The line from fiction to fact had been drawn. A novelist's imagination did not just predict the future, it helped to create it, proving that sometimes the most powerful ideas are those that are written into existence long before they are built in a laboratory. Mark Twain entered and exited the world under the same celestial sign. He was born Samuel Clemens in 1835, the year Halley's Comet blazed across the sky. The great writer always felt a profound connection to that wandering star, and he made a prediction that would become American legend. He stated publicly that he had come in with the comet, and he expected to go out with it. Halley's Comet, with its 76-year orbit, was due for its grand return in 1910, and Twain was determined to meet his destiny. As that year approached, his health was failing, but his wit remained sharp. He knew the timeline, and he seemed to accept it with a kind of wry resignation. Then, on April 21, 1910, just one day after the comet made its closest pass to the sun, Mark Twain died of a heart attack. He had kept his word in the most dramatic fashion possible. Was this a mere coincidence, a statistical fluke in the vastness of time? Or was it something more profound, a powerful act of a mind willing an outcome into being? This story endures not just because of its symmetry, but because it speaks to the strange power of belief. Twain had written his own ending, casting himself as a character in a cosmic story that he himself had authored. His death was not just a biological event, it was the final chapter of a narrative he had been telling for decades, a perfect fusion of a man's life and his legend. While Mark Twain saw his own personal destiny written in the stars, another man was busy mapping the future of all humanity. At the dawn of the 20th century, a civil engineer named John Elfreth Watkins Jr. sat down to write a list of predictions for the year 2000. His article, published in the Ladies' Home Journal, was titled "What May Happen in the Next 100 Years." Watkins did not look to the heavens for answers. Instead, he used his engineer's logic to extrapolate from the rapid technological changes he was witnessing. The result was a list of forecasts that were so accurate they seem almost impossible. He wrote that photographs would be telegraphed from any distance. Think about that for a moment. In an era of black and white prints and slow mail, he envisioned sending a picture instantly across the globe. Today, we call that a digital photograph sent by email or text message. He predicted that wireless telephone and telegraph circuits would span the world, allowing a man in the middle of the Atlantic to converse with his wife in his Chicago sitting room. That is not just a description of mobile phones, it is a perfect summary of our global satellite and cellular network. He even foresaw the rise of ready-cooked meals, which he said would be purchased from establishments similar to our bakeries of today. He was describing the entire concept of takeout and frozen dinners a full century before they became a staple of modern life. Of course, not all his predictions were perfect. He believed that mosquitoes and houseflies would be exterminated, and that the letters C, X, and Q would vanish from our alphabet. He was wrong on those counts. But the sheer volume of his correct forecasts is what stuns the modern reader. He saw the coming of high-speed trains, massive farms producing concentrated food, and giant fruits and vegetables grown through scientific cultivation. His vision was built on a core belief that technology should shrink distances and save time, making life more convenient for everyone. He was not a psychic. He was a practical man who simply followed the logical path of progress, and in doing so, he drew a startlingly accurate map to our present day. While Watkins looked ahead 1 century, a scientific mind from an even earlier era was gazing much further into the future. In the 1660s, the brilliant chemist Robert Boyle kept a private list of 24 dreams for humanity. This was not a casual note. It was a formal, numbered inventory of innovations he hoped would one day be realized, a testament to his boundless curiosity. He called it, quite simply, his wish list, and what he wished for was nothing short of miraculous. He imagined the art of flying, a concept that would not become reality for another 250 years. He dreamed of what he called perpetual light, a source of illumination that would never fade or dim, a clear foreshadowing of the electric light bulb and even modern LED technology. Perhaps most astounding were his medical predictions. He wished for the prolongation of life and even the recovery of youth, a direct line to today's cutting-edge research into genetics and anti-aging therapies. And he wrote of a way to make surgery entirely free from pain. At a time when medical procedures were brutal, agonizing ordeals, Boyle was envisioning the precise miracle of anesthesia. How could a man of the 17th century conceive of such things? Boyle was not guessing. He was a pioneer of the scientific method, a man who understood that knowledge builds upon itself. He saw the incremental progress in optics, mechanics, and medicine, and he extrapolated those lines of discovery to their logical, world-changing conclusions. His wish list was a map drawn from the science of his day, pointing directly to the world we now inhabit. He believed that if humanity could understand the laws of nature, it could one day learn to command them. Centuries after Boyle penned his wish list, an even older voice was demonstrating the immense power of a prediction to mislead. The story of King Croesus of Lydia is a cautionary tale etched in ancient history. He was one of the wealthiest men in the world, his kingdom a beacon of power and gold. But when a new threat emerged in the form of the rising Persian Empire, Croesus sought divine guidance. He sent a magnificent tribute to the oracle at Delphi, the most revered source of prophecy in all of Greece. His question was simple and direct: should he march against the Persians? The oracle's reply was anything but simple. It declared that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Filled with confidence, the king heard exactly what he wanted to hear. He mobilized his armies and crossed the river into Persian territory, fully expecting a glorious victory. The ensuing war, however, was a disaster. His forces were routed, his capital city fell, and Croesus himself was captured. The great empire he destroyed was not that of his enemies, but his own. The oracle had spoken the truth, but its meaning was a perfect trap of ambiguity. This was not a failure of prophecy, but a failure of interpretation. Croesus fell victim to his own assumptions, hearing a promise of triumph where the words themselves offered only a stark and neutral outcome. His story is a masterclass in how our own desires can shape the predictions we receive, bending them to fit the narrative we already have in our hearts. It reminds us that the most dangerous predictions are not the ones that are wrong, but the ones that are technically, devastatingly right. The cryptic verses of Nostradamus have fueled centuries of speculation, and few are cited more often than his supposed forecast of London's destruction. From his Book of Prophecies published in 1566, one quatrain in particular seems to whisper of the catastrophe. In the original French it reads, "Le sang du just à Londres fera fort, brûlés par foudres de vingt trois les six." A common translation suggests the blood of the just will be lacking in London, burnt by fireballs of 23 the 6. For many, this could only point to one event. In 1666, a fire began in a bakery on Pudding Lane and raged for 4 days, consuming most of the medieval city. The phrase 23 the 6 is seen as a direct, if stylized, reference to the year. The mention of fireballs could easily describe the terrifying shower of embers and superheated air that spread the flames, and the blood of the just. Some interpreters link this to the execution of King Charles I, a man considered a martyr by his supporters, which occurred in 1649. The prophecy feels unnervingly precise, yet this is the enduring puzzle of Nostradamus. His verses are masterpieces of ambiguity, written in a mix of languages and dense with metaphor. They are not clear statements but poetic riddles, allowing every generation to find its own disasters reflected in them. The Great Fire of London was a profound trauma, an event that seared itself into the public consciousness. Is it any wonder that people would look for a sign that it had been foreseen, that even this chaos had a place in a larger plan? The power of Nostradamus lies not in his accuracy, but in our deep, human need to find pattern and meaning in the aftermath of calamity. Long before the world was split by an iron curtain, a French political thinker saw the division coming. Alexis de Tocqueville published his monumental work, Democracy in America, in 1835, and within its pages lies a forecast of staggering geopolitical foresight. He wrote that there were two great nations in the world, seemingly advancing toward the same goal from different starting points. These were the Americans and the Russians. He predicted their paths were destined to one day hold the destinies of half the world in their hands. His reasoning was not based on crystal balls, but on cold, hard observation. He saw two nations blessed with almost limitless territory, vast natural resources, and populations that were expanding at a phenomenal rate. The United States was building its power on the foundation of individual liberty and democratic ideals, a society where the energy of the people was its greatest asset. Russia, in contrast, was concentrating its immense might through the principle of autocracy, its strength flowing from the absolute authority of the Tsar. Tocqueville saw these two contrasting systems as rival engines of progress, each one gathering power so immense that they would inevitably eclipse the older empires of Europe. He saw the future not as a single path, but as a collision course between two opposing ideas of what a society could be. This was not a vague guess. It was a profound analysis of the raw materials of power. He understood that land, resources, and people were the fundamental ingredients of national strength, and that these two nations possessed them in quantities no one else could match. He saw the ideological chasm between them as the very thing that would make their rivalry inevitable and global in its scope. 1 century later, his prediction materialized with terrifying precision in the form of the Cold War, a decades-long struggle where the United States and the Soviet Union, the successor to the Russian Empire, did indeed hold the fate of the world in their hands, their nuclear arsenals a constant reminder of the two opposing visions Tocqueville had identified. His insight stands as a testament to the power of political science to see the shape of the future, written not in the stars but in the maps, the census data, and the governing principles of his own time. The name Richard Parker appears twice in the historical record, separated by 46 years and the thin line between fiction and reality. Edgar Allan Poe concluded his 1838 novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, with a scene of desperate survival. After a terrible shipwreck, 4 survivors are adrift in a lifeboat, starving and dying of thirst. Their solution is a grim lottery. They draw lots to decide who will be sacrificed to feed the others. The loser is the young cabin boy, Richard Parker. In Poe's dark narrative, the boy is killed and eaten. This was a shocking piece of fiction, a testament to Poe's imagination. Then, in 1884, the yacht Mignonette sank in the South Atlantic. 4 survivors, including the 17-year-old cabin boy, found themselves in a desperate situation in a small dinghy. Their names were Tom Dudley, Edwin Stevens, Edmund Brooks, and the cabin boy, Richard Parker. After weeks adrift, starving and drinking their own urine, the men made the same horrific choice. They decided to kill and eat the weakest among them. The cabin boy, Richard Parker, was delirious and near death. He was murdered, and the 3 other men survived on his body until they were rescued. The parallels were so exact they defied belief. The same number of survivors, the same dire circumstances, the same method of selection, and most incredibly, the same name for the victim. This was not a vague prediction. It was a specific, haunting echo. The subsequent trial of the Mignonette survivors became a landmark legal case, grappling with the ancient mariner's defense of necessity. Could extreme hunger justify murder? The court ultimately ruled that it could not, establishing a crucial legal principle that you cannot kill an innocent person to save your own life, no matter how dire the situation. The story forces us to question the nature of coincidence. Was this a 1,000,000-to-1 chance, a random collision of a fictional name with a tragic reality? Or does it suggest that some narratives are so powerful, so archetypal, that they can somehow bleed through into the world, waiting for reality to catch up? Poe's dark imagination did not just foresee an event, it provided a complete script down to the very name of the victim. Years before the first computer network was even a concept, a novelist envisioned a world connected by screens. E.M. Forster's 1909 science fiction novella, The Machine Stops, presents a future where humanity lives in isolated, identical underground cells. People rarely meet face to face. Instead, they communicate through a global, instantaneous video network, sharing ideas and attending lectures from the privacy of their personal chambers. They call this system the speaking apparatus, and it is the center of their entire culture. This is a world where physical travel is viewed with suspicion and distaste, and where every need, from food to music, is provided by an omnipotent, godlike entity known simply as the machine. Forster's characters are entirely dependent on this system for their survival, their knowledge, and their social lives. The parallels to our modern world are almost too precise to be believed. His speaking apparatus is a clear forecast of video conferencing platforms like Zoom and Skype. The global exchange of ideas and lectures mirrors our internet, where anyone can access a world of information or share their own thoughts with a global audience. The isolated individuals preferring their curated digital lives to messy physical interaction are a perfect portrait of a culture increasingly shaped by social media and remote work. But Forster was not writing a celebration of this future. He was issuing a stark and urgent warning. His story explores the profound loneliness and intellectual stagnation that can arise when technology replaces direct human experience. His characters have forgotten how to touch the real world, how to feel the wind on their skin or look another person directly in the eye. They have traded authentic connection for the convenience of a digital proxy. The central, chilling prophecy of his story is not the technology itself, but humanity's blind, religious devotion to it. The ultimate horror arrives when the infallible machine, upon which every life depends, begins to falter and then, as the title promises, stops. Forster foresaw not just the internet but the very specific perils of our digital age, the risk of losing ourselves in the very tools designed to connect us. He predicted a world where convenience could become a cage, and his warning echoes down the decades, more relevant with every passing year. While Forster warned of a digital cage, another writer gazed upon the ruins of a fallen empire. In 1863, an American journalist named J. Mitchell published a startlingly bleak short story titled The Last American. It was not a celebration of national destiny, but a satire that imagined a future where the United States was nothing but a desolate wasteland. The story is framed as the journal of a Persian explorer from the year 2951 who sails into New York Harbor to find a city reclaimed by nature. Skyscrapers are skeletal ruins, the streets are buried under silt and sand, and the only signs of the former inhabitants are crumbling statues and rusted machinery. The Persian explorers wander through this ghost of a civilization, utterly baffled by the artifacts they unearth, piecing together a flawed history of the people they call the ancients. Mitchell's prediction was not about a foreign invasion causing this collapse. He pointed the finger directly at internal decay. His story suggests the nation fell due to its own excesses, a combination of political corruption, rampant greed, and a catastrophic neglect of the environment. He described a society that had clear-cut its forests, polluted its rivers, and exhausted its soil, leaving behind a barren land that could no longer support its population. This was an incredibly early piece of environmental commentary, a warning written long before the modern conservation movement even began. the story's power lies in its chilling familiarity. The explorers find a rusted metal plaque they misinterpret as a religious icon. It reads Tammany Hall, a nod to the notoriously corrupt political machine of Mitchell's own time. They uncover evidence of a society obsessed with wealth and status, yet unable to solve its most basic problems. The Last American serves as a stark reminder that civilizations are not immortal. They can be undone not by a single cataclysm, but by a slow, creeping rot from within. Mitchell was holding up a dark mirror to his contemporaries, asking them if the path they were on would lead not to eternal glory, but to a future where their greatest cities would become nothing more than a curiosity for foreign archaeologists. Winston Churchill saw the coming storm not just in the halls of Parliament, but in the laboratories of his day. In 1931, at a time when the world was sliding toward economic collapse and war, he penned a startlingly prescient essay for the Strand magazine titled 50 Years Hence. He looked past the immediate political turmoil and fixed his gaze on the distant horizon of science, predicting a future transformed by forces that seemed like magic. He wrote of a new source of power so potent that a few pounds of matter would light a whole city for a year. This was a clear and direct description of nuclear energy, written more than a decade before the first atomic pile was built. He was not a scientist, but he was a voracious reader and a friend to many of the great scientific minds of his era. He understood the implications of Einstein's theories and the work being done on atomic structure, and he synthesized these complex ideas into a vision of almost limitless power. But his foresight did not stop there. He peered even deeper into the fabric of life itself. He predicted that scientists would one day have the power to shape the forms of life, a phrase that perfectly captures the essence of modern genetic engineering. He even speculated on what we now call in vitro fertilization, suggesting it would be possible to produce a fetus in a laboratory. At a time when the very concept was the stuff of science fiction, Churchill was outlining the fundamental principles of reproductive medicine. His genius lay in his ability to connect the dots. He saw the accelerating pace of discovery in biology, physics, and chemistry, and he understood that these disparate fields were converging toward a single, transformative truth, that humanity was on the verge of learning to manipulate the building blocks of the universe. He was not making wild guesses. He was extrapolating, taking the cutting edge of 1931 science and following its logical, breathtaking trajectory. His essay stands as a monument to a different kind of leadership, one that understands that the future of a nation is not just shaped by its laws and its armies, but by its ability to comprehend and harness the next great wave of human knowledge. Another writer saw the gadgets of tomorrow with the clarity of an engineer's blueprint. In 1911, Hugo Gernsback published a serialized novel with a title as futuristic as its contents, Ralph 124C41+. Gernsback, who would later be crowned the father of science fiction, filled his story with inventions that must have seemed like pure fantasy to his readers. He described a device he called the telephot, a machine that could transmit live images and sound over great distances. He was giving the world a detailed concept for television decades before the first flickering black and white sets entered people's homes. But his vision did not stop there. He imagined humanity harnessing the power of the sun itself, predicting the widespread use of solar energy. He conceived of a machine that could record and play back sound on a thin strip of material, a perfect description of the magnetic tape recorder. The story featured synthetic materials that could replace wood and stone, and even a form of radar, which he described as a device using polarized light to detect distant objects. The sheer volume of his accurate forecasts is staggering, yet Gernsback's true genius was not in prophecy but in purpose. He was not trying to predict an inevitable future. He was trying to build it. He believed that science fiction should be a catalyst for invention, a source of inspiration for the engineers and tinkerers who would read his stories and think, I could build that. He was creating a feedback loop where a fictional idea would spark a real-world experiment, which would in turn inspire a new wave of fiction. His magazine, Amazing Stories, became a playground for the technological imagination, a place where the dreams of one generation became the projects of the next. Gernsback understood that the future is not a destination you arrive at, but a workshop you actively construct, and his stories provided the essential blueprints. While science fiction writers dreamed of machines, a newspaper in Chicago was mapping the social revolution they would create. In 1893, the Chicago Tribune published a special edition to mark the coming new century, and within its pages lay a forecast of staggering clarity. The article focused on the horseless carriage, a novelty at the time, and predicted it would render the horse obsolete, but the writers looked far beyond the stable. They foresaw that this new mode of transport would allow people to live further from their workplaces, leading to a rapid expansion of suburbs. The city would no longer be a tightly packed core, but would sprawl outward, its shape forever altered by the freedom of the automobile. And with this new freedom would come new problems. The article explicitly warned of crowded thoroughfares and impatient drivers, a perfect description of the traffic jams and road rage that would become defining features of the 20th century. This was not a prediction about a machine, but about human behavior. They understood that when you give people the power to travel easily and independently, you change where they live, how they work, and even how they feel when stuck behind another vehicle. The internal combustion engine did not just replace the horse. It redesigned our landscapes, pushing the boundaries of cities and creating entirely new ways of life centered on the commute. It redefined the concept of distance, turning a journey of hours into a trip of minutes. The article saw all of this, the good and the bad, the liberation and the congestion, all stemming from a single technological leap. It serves as a powerful reminder that the most accurate predictions often have little to do with the gadget itself, and everything to do with the waves of change it sends through the fabric of society. A scientist once stood before his colleagues and warned of a famine that would shake the world. In 1898, the eminent chemist Sir William Crookes delivered a presidential address to the British Association that was less a speech and more a dire prophecy. He laid out a simple, terrifying equation. The world's population was growing rapidly, and its food supply depended entirely on wheat. Wheat, in turn, depended on nitrogen-based fertilizers to grow in sufficient quantities. The only major source of these essential nitrates was a finite supply of natural deposits, primarily mined from the remote deserts of Chile. Crookes calculated that these deposits would be exhausted within a few decades. His conclusion was stark. By the 1930s, he declared, the world would face widespread starvation unless science could perform a miracle. Humanity needed to learn how to pluck nitrogen, the most inert and abundant gas in our atmosphere, right out of the thin air and transform it into a form that plants could use. It was like asking someone to turn lead into gold, but with the fate of billions hanging in the balance. Crookes was not a doomsday prophet. He was a brilliant man of science issuing a challenge based on hard data. He saw the trajectory of consumption and the static nature of supply, and he projected the lines to their logical, catastrophic end. His warning was a prediction that carried its own cure, a call to action that echoed through the halls of chemistry across Europe. The answer came from two German scientists, Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch. They took up Crookes' challenge and in the early 1900s pioneered a process of immense complexity and power. The Haber-Bosch process used high pressure and catalysts to crack the stubborn bonds of atmospheric nitrogen, forcing it to combine with hydrogen to create ammonia. This ammonia became the fundamental building block for the synthetic fertilizers that now feed the world. It was the very miracle Crookes had demanded. The fields that once would have been barren now produced bumper crops, supporting a global population explosion that would have been impossible otherwise. This story is unique among predictions. It was not a passive forecast of an inevitable future, but an active catalyst that helped create a different one. Crookes saw a cliff ahead and sounded the alarm so loudly that engineers were inspired to build a bridge before the world ever reached the edge. His dire warning was not a failure of foresight, but its ultimate triumph, a prediction that did not just come true, but one that made sure its own darkest version never would. Edward Bellamy saw money as a relic of a barbaric past. In his 1887 utopian novel, Looking Backward, he transported his protagonist Julian West from the gritty 19th century to the gleaming, perfected world of the year 2000. In this future, the very idea of cash has been abolished. There are no coins, no paper bills, no physical currency of any kind. Instead, every citizen receives their fair share of the nation's wealth through a simple, elegant system. They are each issued a card which Bellamy explicitly called a credit card. This was not a piece of plastic, of course, but the principle was identical. With this card, a person could walk into any public storehouse, select whatever goods they needed, and have the value deducted directly from their annual credit allowance. It was a seamless, cashless society built on the abstraction of monetary value, where your purchasing power was not carried in your pocket but existed as a number, a digital share of the collective output. Bellamy was not predicting a card for borrowing money, but for spending your own allotted portion. In that sense, his vision aligns more closely with our modern debit card than a credit card. Yet the core prediction is stunningly precise. He foresaw a world where a simple piece of identification could unlock access to goods and services, eliminating the need for cumbersome physical exchange. He understood that money was at its heart just information, a representation of value that did not need to be tied to a physical object. This abstraction is the very foundation of our current financial world, where the vast majority of all monetary transactions are just digital data moving from one account to another. His fictional credit card was the key to a utopian ideal, a tool meant to erase economic inequality and the anxieties of capitalism. Our real-world plastic cards, however, have woven a far more complex tapestry. They offer incredible convenience, yes, but they also anchor a system of debt, consumerism, and global finance that Bellamy hoped to leave behind. His prediction came true in form, but the spirit of his cashless future remains a point of profound debate. A powerful heat ray that could slice through steel from miles away was pure fantasy in 1927. Yet that is precisely the weapon Alexei Tolstoy placed in the hands of his villain, the brilliant and ruthless engineer Garin. In his Soviet science fiction novel, The Hyperboloid of Engineer Garin, this device was not magic. It was a machine gun called a hyperboloid, a name taken directly from geometry. Tolstoy described it as using mirrors to concentrate light into a single, devastatingly intense beam, a weapon of conquest that could topple governments and reshape the world. The underlying principle was sound, a fictional application of coherent light, where light waves march in perfect, orderly lockstep instead of the chaotic jumble of ordinary illumination. This coherence is what allows the energy to be focused into an impossibly sharp point over incredible distances, rather than scattering and fading. At the time, this was a theoretical dream, a clever speculation by an author playing with the known ideas of optics and energy. Then, in 1960, that dream was pulled from the pages of fiction and made real. Theodore Maiman switched on the first working laser, a device that used a synthetic ruby crystal to produce a beam of coherent red light. The laser was born, and Tolstoy's hyperboloid had found its real-world counterpart. Today, that same principle of concentrated coherent light performs miracles every second. It reads the price of your groceries at the supermarket, carries vast amounts of data through fiber optic cables beneath the oceans, and reshapes the corneas of human eyes to restore perfect vision. In factories, lasers cut and weld with a precision no human hand could ever match, and on the battlefield, they have evolved into the very heat-ray weapons Tolstoy envisioned, capable of disabling drones and missiles. The line between his fictional device and our modern reality has not just blurred, it has vanished entirely, proving once again that a writer's bold imagination can sometimes be the first draft of a scientific revolution. The sky itself seemed to reject the conventional airplane. In the early 1900s, while most pioneers were building biplanes with boxes for tails, a British designer named John Donne was quietly sketching the future. His obsession was not speed, but stability. He believed an aircraft should fly itself, almost like a thrown boomerang, returning to level flight without constant input from the pilot. His solution was as radical as it was beautiful, a tailless aircraft with wings swept back in a gentle V shape. He called it the Donne D5. This was no mere sketch. It was a fully functional, if strange-looking, machine that actually flew. Witnesses were stunned by its performance. Pilots could take their hands off the controls, and the plane would simply correct itself, riding the air currents with an uncanny, inherent balance. Donne had discovered the secret of automatic stability, a principle born from his swept-wing design that cancelled out the dangerous stalls and spins that plagued early aviation. He had not just built a plane, he had engineered a prediction about the very form a wing should take. The commercial world, however, was not ready for such a radical leap. His flying wings were deemed too unconventional, too strange for the burgeoning passenger market. His company folded, and his designs were largely forgotten by the public. But the seeds had been planted in the minds of other visionaries. Decades later, an American engineer named Jack Northrop would rediscover Donne's work. He saw the genius in that swept-back, tailless form, recognizing its potential for reduced drag and greater efficiency. Northrop's own experiments, the massive YB-35 and the jet-powered YB-49, were direct descendants of Donne's original concept. They were the intermediate step, the proof that the flying wing was not a dead end but the path forward, and that path led directly to one of the most formidable aircraft ever built. The modern B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, with its ghostly, black silhouette, is the ultimate fulfillment of Donne's century-old prediction. Its bat-like shape, devoid of any vertical tail, is a masterpiece of stability and stealth, a form that Donne first proved was possible over the fields of England. He did not just predict a type of plane, he predicted an entire philosophy of flight, one where the wing is not just a part of the machine, but the entire machine itself, a perfect and stable weapon silently gliding through the night. Arthur C. Clarke did not just look at the sky, he saw its potential as a global crossroads. While the world was still recovering from the Second World War, this science fiction author and physicist wrote a technical paper for the magazine Wireless World that would change everything. Published in 1945, his paper was not a story but a blueprint. He proposed placing 3 artificial satellites into a very specific orbit, one that would make them appear to hang motionless over a single point on the Earth's equator. He calculated the precise altitude for this orbit, 22,236 miles above the planet's surface, where a satellite's speed would perfectly match the Earth's rotation. From that incredible height, a single satellite could beam radio signals to nearly a third of the globe. 3 of them, strategically placed, could link the entire world in an unbroken web of communication. This was the birth of the concept we now call the geostationary orbit, a band of space so vital to modern life that scientists often refer to it with a different name, the Clarke orbit. It was a prediction of breathtaking audacity. At the time, no human object had even reached orbit, let alone been placed with such pinpoint precision. Yet Clarke saw past the immense engineering challenges to the logical conclusion. He understood that this was the most efficient way to create a global communications network, a system that could relay television broadcasts, telephone calls, and data across oceans and continents without the limitations of undersea cables or ground-based relays. He was essentially predicting the entire infrastructure of our interconnected world, from live international news feeds to the global positioning signals that guide our cars. His vision had to wait for the technology to catch up. 2 decades later, in 1963, the United States launched SYNCOM-3, the first satellite to achieve a true geostationary orbit. It promptly beamed the Tokyo Olympic Games to a watching world, proving Clarke's concept in the most dramatic way possible. Today, that narrow belt of space is crowded with hundreds of satellites, each one a testament to a single brilliant idea. Clarke's genius was in recognizing that the future was not just about building new machines, but about finding the most elegant place to put them. The future of 2014 was already written 50 years in advance. While visiting the New York World's Fair in 1964, the legendary science fiction author Isaac Asimov sat down to write an article for the New York Times, outlining his vision for the world a half-century hence. His predictions, penned at the dawn of the space age, were a remarkable blend of foresight and imagination. He declared that communication would be both sight and sound, and you would see as well as hear the person you were telephoning. He was describing the world of video calls, of FaceTime and Zoom with perfect clarity. He envisioned kitchens equipped with robotic appliances that would prepare meals and handle the cleaning, a forecast that resonates with our smart ovens and robotic vacuum cleaners. Perhaps his most striking insight was the prediction of what he called portable computer consoles. These devices, he wrote, would provide access to libraries of information, connect people to their offices, and become central to both education and daily life. He was essentially describing the smartphone and the tablet decades before their invention, seeing them not as luxuries but as necessities. Yet even a mind as brilliant as Asimov's could not get everything right. He believed we would have underground and underwater cities, vast arcologies designed to house a booming population away from the crowded surface. He pictured vehicles that hovered above the ground, rendering wheels obsolete. These visions have not come to pass, not because they are impossible, but because the path of progress is rarely a straight line. It zigs and zags, following the currents of economics, social need, and simple convenience. Asimov's legacy is not a perfect scorecard. It is a masterclass in the art of extrapolation, of taking the technologies of today and stretching them to their logical, and sometimes illogical, conclusions. His hits reveal a profound understanding of humanity's drive for connection and convenience. His misses remind us that the future is not a single destination, but a vast landscape of possibilities, most of which we will never visit. A single sentence from 1968 captured the strange nature of modern celebrity. Andy Warhol looked at the growing power of television and mass media and declared that in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. It sounded like a glib, ironic joke at the time, a comment on the fleeting nature of pop culture. But Warhol was not joking. He was observing a fundamental shift in how fame is manufactured and consumed, predicting a world where the spotlight would become democratized, chaotic, and brutally short. Today, his prophecy is the operating system of our culture. Social media platforms are factories for these micro-celebrities, where a single viral video can propel an ordinary person from total obscurity to global recognition in a matter of hours. A dance, a funny pet, a political rant, or even a bizarre mishap can make someone an internet sensation overnight. Reality television perfected this cycle, plucking individuals from their everyday lives and offering them a condensed, dramatic version of those 15 minutes on a national stage. But what happens when the clock runs out? This instant fame is almost always ephemeral. The same algorithms that launch a person into the stratosphere quickly move on, searching for the next new thing, leaving the previous star to fade back into the quiet anonymity from which they came. The cultural implications are profound. Warhol's prediction was a commentary on the flattening of culture, where everyone has access to a platform, but the sheer volume of content means our attention spans have shrunk to almost nothing. We consume people and their stories as disposable entertainment, moving from one viral moment to the next without a second thought. This constant churn has reshaped our very desires, creating a society where fame for its own sake, no matter how brief, is seen as a worthy goal. Warhol was not celebrating this future. He was holding up a mirror to our obsession with visibility and our willingness to trade privacy for a moment in the glow of the screen. His 15 minutes are not a promise of lasting achievement, but a warning about the fleeting, often hollow, nature of fame in a media-saturated world. A new kind of warning arrived in 1972, one written not by a prophet but by a computer. The Club of Rome, a global think tank, published a groundbreaking study titled The Limits to Growth. For the first time, a team of scientists used system dynamics modeling to project the future of our entire industrial civilization. They fed data on 5 key trends into their computers: world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and the consumption of non-renewable resources. The model asked a simple, terrifying question: what happens if humanity continues on its current path with no major changes in behavior? The computer's answer was stark. It projected that within a century, the planet would hit a hard ceiling. The combination of resource depletion, rampant pollution, and a population outstripping its food supply would lead to a sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. This was not a prediction of a single event, but of a systemic collapse. The report did not say the future was predetermined. It explored multiple scenarios, showing that if societies chose to prioritize sustainability and stabilize their consumption, a different, more balanced future was possible. But the business-as-usual scenario painted a grim picture of overshoot and collapse. The report ignited a firestorm of controversy. Critics, many from industry and conservative economic circles, lambasted it as alarmist and flawed. They argued that the models were too simplistic, that they failed to account for human ingenuity and the ability of technological innovation to constantly find new resources or solutions. The very idea of limits was anathema to the post-war ethos of infinite economic growth. For decades, it was fashionable in many quarters to dismiss the limits to growth as a failed prophecy. But as the years turned into decades, a strange thing happened. Independent researchers began to check the data. They compared the report's standard run scenario, the one based on no major policy changes, against what actually unfolded from 1970 to 2000. The results were sobering. The real-world data on population growth, industrial output, and resource use tracked the model's projection for collapse remarkably closely. It wasn't a perfect match, but the trajectory was uncannily accurate, suggesting we were indeed on the path the computer had outlined. The report's true legacy was not in predicting a specific doomsday, but in fundamentally shifting the global conversation. It gave the burgeoning environmental movement a powerful, data-driven argument, introducing the world to the concepts of ecological footprints and planetary boundaries. It forced economists and politicians to at least consider the idea that endless growth on a finite planet might be a physical impossibility. The debate it started 50 years ago is now at the very center of our most urgent crises, from climate change to biodiversity loss. The warning from that early computer model hangs in the air today, a question we are still struggling to answer. Can we rewrite the program of our own future before the system itself forces our hand? George Orwell gave the world a vocabulary for its deepest fears about power. His novel 1984, written in 1949, envisioned a future of total control, a society perpetually at war and under the watchful eye of an all-knowing party. Its most chilling symbol was the telescreen, a device that could not be turned off. It broadcast a constant stream of propaganda, but it also watched every gesture and listened to every whisper in every home. This was not just a television, it was a two-way portal for surveillance, ensuring that even private thought could become a public crime. Orwell called this constant supervision Big Brother, and he gave a name to the systematic destruction of facts, newspeak, and the memory hole. In his world, the past was not fixed. It was a story that could be rewritten daily to match the party's current needs, making objective truth impossible and dissent unthinkable. The parallels to our own time are not just striking, they are foundational. The telescreen has fragmented and multiplied, becoming the smartphone in your pocket, the smart speaker in your kitchen, and the webcam on your laptop. These devices offer incredible convenience, yet they are also portals that collect our data, track our locations, and learn our habits. This is not a single, centralized Big Brother, but a distributed system of corporate and government surveillance that achieves a similar result, a detailed digital profile of our lives. The concept of newspeak finds its echo in the twisting of language online, where terms are redefined and narratives are manipulated to serve political or commercial agendas. And the memory hole feels terrifyingly real in the age of deepfakes, where video evidence can be fabricated to show anyone saying or doing anything, and where digital archives can be altered or erased with a few keystrokes. Orwell was not predicting specific gadgets. He was predicting a state of mind, a relationship between power and the individual. He foresaw a world where technology would not liberate humanity, but would instead provide the perfect tools for its subjugation. A world where privacy is sacrificed for security and truth becomes a flexible tool for those in control. His novel remains a vital warning because it asks the most urgent question of our digital age, not whether such a future is possible, but whether we are already willingly building it ourselves. Another author peered into the living rooms of the future and saw a world deafened by its own entertainment. In his 1953 novel Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury described a society where people were constantly plugged into an alternate reality. He called them seashells, small, shell-like devices that fit snugly into the ear, and thimble radios, both of which played a never-ending stream of music, news, and chatter directly to the listener. This was not a casual prediction. It was a precise and chillingly accurate forecast of modern earbuds and the entire culture of personalized audio. His characters walked through their lives with these seashells whispering in their ears, creating a private soundscape that walled them off from the people and the world immediately around them. They were physically present but mentally absent, lost in a curated flow of noise that demanded no real interaction. Bradbury was not just predicting a piece of technology. He was predicting a state of being, a cultural shift where we would willingly trade genuine human connection for the convenience of a constant, personalized broadcast. This is the world of podcasts, music streaming, and audiobooks we live in today. We slip in our own seashells to block out a crowded subway, to escape a tedious chore, or to fill a moment of silence. The technology itself is a marvel, but Bradbury's genius was in foreseeing its social cost. His novel warns of a populace that becomes disengaged from the messy, unpredictable reality of face-to-face conversation, preferring the safe, controlled narrative fed directly into their heads. The seashells were a tool for mass distraction, a way to pacify a society and prevent it from looking too closely at the troubling truths of its own existence. Bradbury's prediction extends beyond the earbud in your ear to the smartphone in your hand, another device that offers a constant, interactive stream of media designed to capture and hold our attention at all costs. He saw a future where we would be surrounded by screens and sounds, yet feel profoundly disconnected from the people sitting right beside us. His warning asks us a difficult question. Have we created a world where the very tools that connect us to a global library of information are the same ones that isolate us from our own neighborhoods? A world without murder sounds like a perfect utopia, but Philip K. Dick saw its terrifying cost. In his 1956 story Minority Report, he introduced the concept of precrime, a police unit that uses the visions of psychics to arrest people for murders they have not yet committed. The accused are convicted and imprisoned for a crime that exists only as a future possibility, a grim statistic that proves the system's success by erasing any evidence it could be wrong. The story's central, chilling question is whether a future you have seen can be changed, or if the very act of prediction locks that destiny into place. This was speculative fiction at its most profound, exploring the conflict between free will and a seemingly perfect system of preemptive justice. Decades later, we are building our own version of crime, not with psychics but with algorithms. Modern predictive policing uses vast pools of data, from past arrest records to social media activity and even weather reports, to generate forecasts. These algorithms create heat maps of where crime is most likely to occur, and in some advanced systems, they even generate lists of individuals deemed most likely to either commit a violent act or become a victim of one. The parallels are startling. Just like in Dick's story, we are developing systems that attempt to act before a crime happens, shifting the focus of justice from punishment to prevention. But these algorithms are not infallible oracles. They are trained on historical data, and that data is often riddled with the biases of the past. If a police department has historically over-patrolled certain neighborhoods, the algorithm will see more crime reports from that area and recommend even more patrols, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of suspicion. An individual could be flagged as a potential offender simply because they live in a certain zip code or have friends who have been arrested, trapping them in a digital feedback loop that mirrors the psychic determinism of Minority Report. The ethical dilemma Dick posed is now our own. How do we balance public safety with the presumption of innocence? Can you truly punish someone for a path they have not yet taken? The story's title itself, Minority Report, refers to the dissenting vision of one psychic that sometimes contradicts the others, a glitch in the system that suggests the future might not be fixed after all. In our world, that glitch is the human element, the constant need to question the cold certainty of the data, and remember that behind every prediction is a person whose future has not yet been written. A full decade before the internet became a household utility, a novelist gave it a name and a visual landscape. William Gibson's 1984 cyberpunk masterpiece, Neuromancer, did not just predict a global network, it made you feel it. He called this digital realm cyberspace, describing it as a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions. His characters did not type on keyboards and read text on screens. They jacked their minds directly into this vast network, navigating it as a three-dimensional universe of glowing data constellations, corporate fortresses, and shimmering ice that represented security systems. This was not a dry technical forecast. It was a full sensory vision of a world where information had physical form and digital space was a place you could literally get lost in. Gibson's genius was in framing the internet not as a tool, but as a territory, a new frontier as real and dangerous as any physical continent. His prediction fundamentally shaped how an entire generation of programmers and designers would go on to build the real thing. The very idea of navigating a website, of moving through pages and links, owes a conceptual debt to Gibson's vision of traversing a data landscape. His descriptions of dense urban information zones directly influenced the visual language of early virtual worlds and video games. More profoundly, his concept of cyberspace laid the philosophical groundwork for everything we now call the metaverse, that ambitious dream of a persistent, shared virtual reality. He foresaw that the digital world would not just be a library of facts, but an extension of our reality, a space for social interaction, commerce, and identity. Long before social media profiles, his characters had digital selves that could be hacked, upgraded, or even erased. Gibson did not have a technical blueprint, but he understood the human impulse. He knew that once we built a network that connected everyone, we would not just use it, we would inhabit it. His dark, neon-drenched prophecy became a self-fulfilling one. providing the myth and the metaphor that would help an entire culture visualize a future that was already on its way. Even the most terrifying predictions can be diffused by reality. The final forecast on our list swept through the public consciousness not from a novelist or a scientist, but from a perfect storm of media headlines. In the 1990s, a wave of dread arrived on buzzing wings, the fear of Africanized killer bees swarming up from South America to invade the United States. News reports told of hyper-aggressive hybrids that would chase victims for over a mile, attacking in massive, coordinated swarms. The narrative was simple and terrifying. These bees were coming, and they were going to cause widespread chaos and death. The prediction was rooted in a real event. In the 1950s, Brazilian scientists had indeed imported African honeybees in an effort to boost honey production. A handful of these aggressive queens accidentally escaped, crossbreeding with local European honeybees. The resulting hybrid, the Africanized honeybee, was indeed more defensive, quicker to swarm, and more persistent in its attacks than the common honeybee. They began a slow, steady migration north, and by the 1980s they had reached Mexico. The prediction of their inevitable arrival in the United States was, in itself, a logical and accurate forecast. But that is where the facts ended and the frenzy began. The media amplified the threat into an apocalyptic scenario, fueled by dramatic television movies and sensational news segments. The term killer bees itself was a media creation, a label that stuck and magnified the public's fear far beyond the actual risk. The prediction became a self-perpetuating narrative, where each new report of the bees advancing another 100 miles north was treated like the approach of an unstoppable army. So what actually happened when the bees finally crossed the border? They did establish colonies in the southern United States, from Texas to Florida and California. There were, and still are, documented attacks on people and animals, yet the predicted nationwide epidemic of human fatalities never materialized. The death toll, while tragic, remained in the dozens over decades, a far cry from the thousands the panic had suggested. The killer bee prediction serves as a masterclass in how a potential hazard can be transformed into a cultural monster. The media needed a compelling story, and the public, primed by years of buildup, was eager to consume it. The narrative was so powerful that it overshadowed the more mundane reality, that while these bees were a genuine concern for beekeepers and a danger to those with allergies, they were not the swarming killers of popular imagination. This story concludes our journey through 30 predictions, and it offers a crucial final lesson. A prediction's power is not measured solely by its accuracy, but by the resonance of its story. Whether it is a blueprint for a submarine, a warning of atomic energy, or a panic over buzzing insects, each forecast tells us as much about the fears and hopes of the time that produced it as it does about the future it tried to describe. The past is filled with voices who saw what was coming, but the most enduring predictions are those that speak directly to the human heart. From ancient oracles seeing the fall of kings to science fiction authors sketching the blueprints for our digital world, these 30 predictions reveal a stunning truth about human nature. We are not merely creatures of the present. We possess a unique ability to cast our minds forward, to connect the dots of current trends and see the shape of what is to come. Sometimes this foresight is born from pure, logical extrapolation, as with the engineer who mapped out our modern suburbs or the politician who calculated the rise of superpowers. Other times it springs from a deeper well of intuition, a haunting feeling that gives a fictional ship the same name as a real-life tragedy. And often, it is the wild, untamed power of imagination that plants the seed, inspiring generations of scientists and inventors to turn a novelist's dream into a working laser or a global communications network. This incredible range, from the mystical to the mathematical, shows that predicting the future is not one single skill, but a fundamental part of how we understand our place in time. It forces us to ask one final, profound question. If the past is filled with people who accurately saw our present, then are we, right now, living in someone else's predicted future? Perhaps a novel being written today or a scientific paper published this very year contains the first faint glimpse of the world your grandchildren will inherit. The story of tomorrow is already being written. What historical prediction amazes you the most? Share your favorite in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the incredible mysteries of our past.